There's four words I want to present to you today, and I want you to educate us. And the reason I ask this is because this morning you were talking about the pastor that had 6 people that contributes a lot there in Virginia, a large auditorium, but yet he's under attack. Louisiana pastor yesterday recently arrested. We had in Tennessee a judge ruling in favor of abortion clinics using the words time essential. And then we had here in Kentucky the governor releasing felons early, even though there's no coronavirus in the prisons. And he's also given multi-felons the rights to vote. And so there's a word called oligarchy. And I want you to explain that and how close are we related to that word right now?
Well, oligarchy is certainly government by a few, and in some cases we might have a monarchy, government by one, and that is the single governor of a state, like in Kentucky, Bashir, for example, where you are located, or it could be a mayor or of a local county. So it's even worse than an oligarchy. We really have a single individual oftentimes issuing these executive orders and then just imposing their own view, not constitutional. If you look at, let me start with the last mention you had, the governor in Kentucky releasing these criminals. Well, the governor or the sheriff in Hillsborough County, Florida, where the pastor that we represent was arrested, the pastor of the River at Tampa Bay Church, and he was arrested on March the 29th, a Sunday, by the same sheriff that ultimately okayed his church service the previous Thursday. That same sheriff that arrested the pastor also released 164 criminals. One of those criminals, the very next day he got out of jail, killed an innocent person. He's now back in prison. This individual had, I think, 35 charges before. He had several convictions for felonies, several convictions for misdemeanors. He was a very bad individual, and he was released. And unfortunately, now there's blood on the hands of that sheriff who released him because there was a direct causal relationship between that person getting out and the very next day, getting a weapon, getting heroin, getting drug paraphernalia, and going out and killing an individual. So that's the kind of insanity that we have. For example, in Virginia, we have a governor that says that abortion is okay and it's essential, that even signs into law on Good Friday abortion legislation that promotes abortion, that actually removed some of the restrictions and the requirements for even informed information about abortion, did that on Good Friday. He's then imposed a 10-person limit on churches, but you can crowd the local liquor stores to your, whatever you want to do, however many people can get in there or get in the parking lot, and that's no problem because he considers that essential. So in Virginia, we have a church, the Lighthouse Church, and that church had a 293-seat sanctuary. The Sunday before Easter, they had 16 people in a roughly 300-seat sanctuary, far and wide spread out. 6 people over the governor's magic number that he divined out of nowhere. There's no science behind the number 10. And so he got charged with a misdemeanor that in Virginia is up to a year in jail and a $2,500 fine. He was told that if any of you come back again, and this was the next Sunday would have been Easter, they would charge every single person. So if they had 11 people, all 11 of those, only one person over, if they had 11 people, all of them would get the same fine and criminal charge. This church doesn't have internet. This church has no internet. Many of the people don't have any internet. It ministers to many of the people are former drug addicts or prostitutes. They take them to different health appointments. They help them fill out, disability forms and so forth. The only family these people have is the church. So when the church shuts down, there is no online option. And that's the kind of insanity that we're seeing around the country. We, as a result, fortunately, of this pastor's arrest that we represent, we're still involved in that case in Florida. 2 days later, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, became the first governor in the country to say that churches are essential. There was a few others that said something to that effect, but he took off the restrictions on churches. That was April the 1st. We don't have this influx of people, having sardine type of services where they're packed in. People are using reasonable judgment, as they should, but they don't have the government, and they shouldn't have the government, telling them when to worship, how many people they can have in their service. In New Mexico, I just got a communication this week and recently, as even this morning, we're having Reopen Church Sunday that we're promoting May the 3rd. And the President's Reopen America plan, or Opening America Again plan, begins with May 1 for the gradual reopening in phases of the country. And included in phase 1 are churches. We selected May 3 as the National Reopen Church Sunday. And we have a website that we've done at Liberty Council's website, lc.org, but also reopenchurch.org. Well, this person just sent me an email and said he'd love to reopen, but in New Mexico they say 5 people is all you can have, 5 people in the sanctuary. So, I mean, David, these restrictions are unconstitutional. They do not have the constitutional backing. And here's something that we ought to remember. And even though, I said this early on from the very beginning, some people push back, but it's true. And I think more and more people are realizing it now. You're seeing protest in all these different capitals, and a big one today in Richmond, Virginia, and other places. And that is the Constitution doesn't have a pause button. It doesn't matter whether you're in a pandemic or any other crisis. We do not forget, we do not shut off the lights on the Constitution. It doesn't go into hibernation. You still have the First Amendment right to exist. Liquor stores, Kmart, Walmart, all of those, they do not have a constitutional right to exist or to operate. But churches do. It's protected in the First Amendment in 2 ways. Free exercise of religion, and government shall not establish a religion. Now, government has no authority. If your building can hold 500 people, no authority to tell you can only have 10 people in there. No authority to tell you can only do online. No authority to tell you that you can't do parking lot services or that's the only service you can do. No authority like this one government in California is telling churches, if you're going to do online and you're going to broadcast it from the church, less than 10 people, they said, and you can't use wind instruments, only percussion instruments. I mean, where do they get that authority?
Right.
Nowhere.
Right.
And it is prohibited from them exercising that kind of authority under the Constitution of the United States of America and most of the state constitutions as well.
Matt, there's another word that's related to the monarchy and the oligarchy, and that's I can't say
autocracy. Yeah.
Autocracy. Yeah, thank you for that. But how that's in relation to this situation?
Yeah, that's more like a monarchy where they're just becoming a law unto themselves, and they think they are the law. And the problem is when they issue these kinds of rules or executive orders, they don't even think about the Constitution. And like if you look at the governor of New Jersey, he was asked on a national television program about how did you square the restrictions on churches with the Constitution, the First Amendment. And you know what his answer was? I never thought about it. That's above my pay grade. No, I'm sorry, Governor. You took an oath to defend the Constitution of your state of New Jersey and of the United States of America. That is what you get paid for. That is not above your pay grade or anybody else's pay grade, anybody who is part of We the People. That is a protection. It's a bulwark against government tyranny. You go look at, for example, Kentucky, the church that we're representing there, Maryville Baptist Church. Governor Beshear says it's okay to flood the liquor stores and every other kind of store to go buy essential things such as garden hoses and potted plants, maybe picture frames or some cloth to sew something, or whatever it may be. But you can't go to church and in more than 10. And on Good Friday, he threatened to give the police authority to go to the parking lots and then take down license plates and give notices of quarantine. That was on Good Friday. On Saturday, before the Easter, federal judge says, no, a mayor in Louisville can't do that which you threatened, and also which is what the governor threatened. You're carrying out what the governor had threatened. That's unconstitutional, violates the First Amendment. But on Easter, Governor Beshear did it anyway, and he did it to Maryville Baptist Church, and he went and sent state troopers to the parking lot, and you were there that day to film things and take photographs out in the parking lot.
Right.
And there were people that, it's a 700 or so seat sanctuary, the pastor tells me, and a small number inside. The officers never even went inside to check it out, far and apart from each other. And even those that were wanting to stay in the cars for the parking lot service, they still got notices of violation. And so then a few days later, the governor sent them all a letter that they have to self-quarantine, and that they have to take their temperature at a certain time every day, and they have to report it to the local county board of health, and they can't travel here and they can't travel there, and all these different restrictions on them. Some people this week, David, have been fired from their job.
Right.
Because the employers found out that they go to that church. They go to the church. I have seen situations in some parts of the country where there is a church that may be meeting with a small group, and they've gone into stores, and they might be identified as somebody who's a member of that church, and some people refuse to even serve them. I mean, this is absolutely out of control.
Well, I want you to tell me, since you represent Maryville Baptist, there was also another church in Carrollton County that received those notices, I understand. But what is the difference? And I'm having a hard time with this, and I'm trying to understand too. What is the difference between a drive-in church and a walk-in church?
There's really no difference in the sense that, other than what they're saying. I mean, a drive-in church would be you drive in. I guess you just sit in your car. A walk-in church, you drive in and you get out of your car and you go inside. But the government doesn't have the right to make those distinctions. They don't have the right to say 10 people or no people inside the sanctuary or only online or only drive-in or no drive-in. They just don't have the right to do it. That's the government. You know, some people have said, well, Romans 13 says you need to obey the authorities, and people cite, from 2 Peter. If you go read those in context, what they say is the government is instituted to protect the civic order. And what is its purpose? It tells you what its purpose is. To punish the evildoer, to punish the criminals, the people that are doing bad, and to protect the people that are doing good. That's its purpose. Keep the order. Punish the evildoer, protect the good. Now, one area that it doesn't have jurisdiction on is the church. Jesus said, render to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar. Therefore, you have to pay your taxes even though you don't like it. And unto God the things that belong to God. The church, our right to worship, our duty to worship the Creator according to our conscience, is not the jurisdiction of the government. And they don't have the ability, the authority. They've never been given it. The First Amendment to the United States is the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights for a reason. It draws a line in the sand. This is a line, government, that you cannot cross. And you cannot interfere with the free exercise of religion. And you cannot establish a religion. And they're establishing a religion by telling you how their view of religion is, whether your religion is essential or not, whether your church is essential or not. They have no authority to make that determination that a liquor store is essential, an abortion clinic is essential, but church is not.
Man, I want you to relate these 4 words, and they're called ignorance, fear, control, and surrender. How are they related?
Well, ignorance, obviously, is, you're not aware. The Scriptures, I think, are the best way to combat that. The fear of the Lord, the awe of the Lord, the respect of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You can have people with medical degrees, and you can have the Bill Gates modeling system that people relied upon, the World Health Organization that people relied upon, And, when I pushed back against those, some people said, well, are you a medical doctor? Well, do you listen to the medical doctors about whether or not abortion is okay? No. You don't rely upon that you don't need an MD degree to have reason and to read. So the fear of the Lord, the respect, the awe of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. When you're in the presence of the Lord, there is no fear, zero fear. It doesn't matter whether you're facing the lion's den or the fiery furnace. It doesn't matter whether, you're the Apostle Paul and you're facing stoning, martyrdom. There is no fear. It doesn't matter whether you're in the boat with Jesus and the boat is about ready to capsize and you can't swim very well. And what's Jesus doing? Laying with his head on a pillow in the stern of the boat. And the disciples said, you have no concern for us? We're about ready to die? Jesus rebukes the wind and the waves with the word, peace. Cut it out. Calm down, he says. And the wind and the waves stop. And then he looks to the disciples and he says, why do you have no faith? He said, fear not, little flock. There is no fear. I have never had a single centimeter of fear throughout this. That doesn't mean you're careless or reckless. It means that there is no fear. But if you don't have that information, the wisdom that comes from God, and you are fearful, then what will happen is you will become controlled by those who push the fear. And what has happened is the media have been pushing panic, false information many times, and that has been ultimately fueled by people like Bill Gates, the WHO, other people that are these mandatory vaccinations, digital ID people, track your system, put a system where your health is always registered like they have in China with the mandatory apps on your phone, where to enter a building you have to show your phone and it is either green, yellow, or red, and that gives you entrance, kind of like having an airline ticket. MIT, with its Technology Review magazine, said that this is what's coming, and we're just going to have to get used to it. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get used to that.
Yes,
so,
sir.
Having ignorance ultimately in fear leads you to become somebody who's just led by the masses who have another agenda. Or not by the masses, but by the few, I should say. By the few to lead the masses because they have another agenda.
Well, Mark, Matt, I've discovered a new legal term with the government releasing all of this money that they don't have. I guess they're printing it, but I've become familiar with a term called plutocracy. And how alarming is that with what's going on with our government and money?
Well, the whole issue with the national debt was a real problem anyway, and it was a problem before President Trump became president. It has become a growing problem, in part because he hasn't had a willing House. He's got a House of Representatives that's willing to literally shut down the United States in order to get their big funding. Hopefully that change comes in November. But then, of course, you have this other funding that just came forth. The government doesn't have it. It just prints it, and it ultimately results in devaluing the currency. We have a real problem. I think one problem that we have that we really need to deal with is China. And, the Missouri Attorney General just filed a lawsuit against China. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. China was up to some bad things. They've always been up to bad things. The government, not the Chinese people, but the government itself, the communist government. And up until recently, we've just gone along with China. For the first time, we have a president that pushes back. But we now know that, obviously, this virus came from Wuhan. It's likely that it came from their biowarfare lab in Wuhan. It's likely that it was in effect much earlier than they said, and they withheld information. And yet they continued to allow people to travel around the world, including direct flights from Wuhan to New York City. That's the reason why New York City seems to have gotten more cases of the virus than other places around the country. We need, the whole economic collapse all of the injuries are directly related to China, and we as a government, and really as nations around the world, we ought to be very focused on sanctioning China and holding China accountable.
Well, Matt, you have a schedule, and I'm going to have to let you go, but I want to ask you one other question, and this concerns me deeply. We talked about monarchy and autocracy and all those kind of things. There are three branches of our government. Lawmakers make laws. Governors are executives. They execute the law, not make the law. And then judges, they only give opinions. And we are out of control, all three branches. You agree?
Oh, I think we're definitely out of control. No question about that. And we need to get back into control. If you look, for example, at some of these cases that are out there where, with the judges, you have a big change that's happening within the judicial branch with the appointments by President Trump. But if you look at what's happened and I'm not saying they always make the right decisions, but I'm saying that there is a difference out there, and we've seen it firsthand many times already. But in our legislatures, state level, for example, and in our counties, you see that. Right now, some of these onerous restrictions, they were coming from both parties. But now it's really coming from the ones that were stricter came from Democrats, and the ones I think that'll last longer are coming from Democrats, both on the state level and on the local level. And you can see that in Kentucky, Virginia, Kansas. Kansas governor just got overruled last Saturday by a federal court that says this limitation on 10 people in churches is unconstitutional. But you see this in other places where you've got Democratic gubernatorial leaders. Like in Kentucky, for example, you've got a Democrat governor and an attorney general who's Republican. Well, the attorney general opposes the governor's restrictions on churches and has already filed an amicus brief in one of the cases there in Kentucky. The Republican attorney general in Kansas opposed the Democratic governor's restriction on churches and issued a public statement. Now a federal court has agreed with the attorney general. So you're seeing a difference, and I hope people see that. Because as we start to reopen America with President Trump's proposed plan, you're going to see even more clearly those blue states. When I say blue, led by Democratic governors, it may not be all blue, but the Democratic governor, you're going to see those restrictions lagging on longer. And I hope people begin to see, hey, elections do make a difference, and we need to make sure at the state level, at the local level, at the U.S. level, that we vote the right people in office, because it does affect directly our liberty and freedom.
Matt, thank you for Liberty Counsel for all that you do, and